When I was 19, I had a part-time job working in my town's local movie theater. This happened on Christmas Eve, a night that I was scheduled to work. I never really understood why the theater stayed open over the holiday. It was always completely dead, or at least in my town. Though, this fact alone made working the Christmas Eve shift not that bad. Yeah, you have to work, but there's not really anything to do. You could basically just sit there on your phone until close. We would typically close around 1 a.m. I had an 8-hour shift, and the second half of it I would be working alone. This would mean I'd be the one responsible for locking up the building, something I had done on multiple different occasions. As I expected, the shift was pretty uneventful. We'd get maybe 1 or 2 people coming in every hour at most. At around 10 p.m., because where I sat during my shift had a view outside, I couldn't help but notice a car just sitting near the back end of the parking lot, like headlights facing the building just sitting there. I didn't think it was weird at first. It wasn't uncommon for moviegoers to wait in their car until their movie started, so that way they wouldn't have to watch the commercials that played beforehand. But I realized this wasn't the case when the car was still there near the time I'd start closing up. By this point, there were literally only 2 cars left in the parking lot, mine and the one in the back, still running and with its headlights on. I began closing up, hoping that by the time I was done, the car would be gone. But it wasn't. It was still there just as before. All I had left to do was lock the front doors and I could leave. I was dreading this, but I figured the quicker I got it done, the quicker I could go home. I stepped outside and turned around to lock the front doors. But when I turned back around, 3 of the car's doors had been opened. This would be shortly followed by 3 grown men stepping out and starting to speed walk in my direction. I was now in a full panic and started sprinting towards my car, not even trying to hide it. This would be met with the men doing the same. Luckily, however, I was closer and was able to get inside and lock the doors before they could reach me. But as I started to back out, I saw the men running back towards their car. And as I was exiting the parking lot, the car pulled right up to my bumper. I instantly knew they were going to follow me. I didn't know what to do or even where to go. If I went home, they would know where I lived. I ended up calling my dad in a panic, and he would have me meet him at the nearest police station. The car followed me all the way there. Once I reached the police station, however, the car would zoom past me. This was hands down the scariest thing I've ever had to go through. I live in a town where stuff like this is extremely rare, so I guess I never really thought I myself would ever encounter a situation like this. Had I taken a few extra seconds to get to my car, I would have been subject to whatever these guys had planned. Which, I still don't know what that was, but from what I could tell, it clearly wasn't anything good. Come Christmas morning, and I would call my boss to inform him of what I had experienced. Afterward, I would never be scheduled to work the late shift again. This happened on Christmas Eve when I was 26. At the time, I lived alone in a small house in a semi-desolate area of West Virginia. My family, however, was located on the other side of the country. So this, along with the fact that my job required me to work long hours, I often stayed home for Christmas. And this year was no different. I, of course, had to work on Christmas Eve. When I got home, I was exhausted. Even though it was only about 8 p.m., I decided to just grab something to eat and go to bed. So that's what I did. Fast forward a few hours, and I woke up to the sound of footsteps upstairs inside my house. Now, it's important to note that my bedroom was in the basement of the house. Therefore, pretty much any sound from the main floor was completely audible from where I slept. I wasn't completely on edge right away. It wasn't that rare for my friend to spend the night at my house after a night out in the nearest city. While still far, my house was a lot closer to the city than his was. Therefore, an Uber back to my place was much cheaper than going all the way back to his own. He would typically have his girlfriend pick him up later the next morning. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. But whenever he did this, he would always at least text me beforehand to let me know. And I didn't have any new notifications on my phone. I got out of bed, walked to the bottom of the basement stairs, and yelled out my friend's name. though this was instantly met with loud footsteps as someone started running through the main floor of my house. I instinctively ran under the stairs and hid in a crawl space. Horrifyingly, the footsteps began rushing down the stairs. There was nothing I could do at this point but pray that whoever was in my house would not check inside the crawl space. I sat there and listened as footsteps ran all throughout the basement. Whoever this was began flipping couches, moving furniture, and forcefully kicking down closets, all in what I can only assume was an attempt to find me. I couldn't control my breathing at this point, and my heart was beating out of my chest. Should the crawl space door be found, I had nothing to defend myself. I left my phone in my bedroom, so I had no way of even calling someone. That's when I could hear a male scream of frustration echo throughout the basement. And this was shortly followed by the man running back up the stairs. I would wait in my basement's crawl space for the next what had to be close to 2 hours. Periodically throughout this time, I would hear crashing/banging sounds from the main floor. Though, after there was a 15-minute period of silence, I took the opportunity to run to my room and get my phone. The first thing I noticed when I exited the crawl space was the complete and utter disarray of my house's basement. Not much was necessarily broken, rather the basement was just in a state of complete chaos. However, my cell phone was miraculously left on my nightstand. So, I quickly grabbed it, ran back into the crawl space, and called the police. I would wait in the crawl space for the next 20 minutes until police arrived. When they did, I would go upstairs and reveal myself. The main floor was a mess, almost just as bad as downstairs. On top of that, all the doors into the house had been left completely open. I would explain the situation to the officers that arrived, and they would proceed to completely check the house from top to bottom. At no point did they find the intruder, though they did find where the intruder had entered the house. This would turn out to be the back sliding glass door that had forcefully been pried open. The police officers asked for all the information I knew and filed a report, though I got the sense I wasn't much help to them. I didn't really have much to give them other than what I heard, as I never really saw anything. Ultimately, they told me to stay with friends or family until I could get the back door fixed. So that's what I did. I stayed with a friend that night and ended up spending all of Christmas Day cleaning up my house and fixing the back door. This experience happened years ago now, and I still have not even a clue who the intruder was. Nothing was stolen, so it obviously wasn't just your everyday house intruder. Ever since it happened, I've sort of just stuck with the belief that it was some random guy who was not mentally stable, but I don't think I'll ever be able to confirm this. I still do everything I can to not think about what would have happened had the intruder looked for me in the crawl space. I lived in that house for another year after that, and nothing else would happen during that time. This happened a couple years back on Christmas Eve. Ever since I was a kid, it was kind of tradition for me to spend Christmas Eve with a good friend of mine named Anthony. His family would always invite me to come over, and we'd play board games, open presents, and the usual stuff you do on Christmas Eve. Then, of course, before the morning, I'd go back home and spend Christmas Day with my own family. I'd been doing this for as long as I can remember, and this year was set to go the same way. I was at Anthony's house, and by this point it was close to midnight, around the time I'd start heading back home. Though, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little intoxicated. I told them I'd call an Uber, but Anthony offered to drive me home himself. We didn't live that far from each other, so I of course accepted his offer, especially considering how expensive Uber rides can get. Now, while like I said, the drive wasn't that long, the scenery itself was essentially a dark, unlit road surrounded on both sides by forest, with the occasional cabin. On top of that, it had been snowing, with a decent amount of snow on the ground already. I'd memorized these roads ever since I was a kid, but even to this day, I still get an eerie feeling being on them at night. Anyway, as Anthony continued driving, something suddenly appeared to be running across the road in front of us. It wasn't close enough to where we almost hit it, but it did cause Anthony to slam on the brakes. Now, mind you, the road is pitch black, so while we did look out the window into the woods to see if we could see what it was, Realistically, all we could see was what was being lit by the car's headlights directly in front of us. Anthony looked at me and said it was most likely just a deer. I told him to turn on the high beams, and I go outside to check it out. Looking back, I don't know what made me think this was a good idea. No one was making me do this, and I really don't remember what my thought process was. Maybe it's because I was slightly inebriated, but I really don't know. Anyway, I get out of the car and start walking up to where I'd seen the figure run across the road. But after only a few seconds, I stopped dead in my tracks. On the ground right in front of me were human footprints in the snow, and they were clearly fresh. There was no doubt in my mind. Whoever made these footprints is who we saw. My heart started pounding. I was now 100% sobered by the situation. I stood there, following the footprints into the woods with my eyes, when suddenly the car's horn blares out. I jumped in reaction. I was so focused on the footprints that it startled me. I looked back at Anthony, confused, but he kept honking the horn. I walked back to the car and got inside. I asked him why he was laying on the horn like that. He didn't say anything, but instead pointed into the woods slightly off the road. I looked over in the direction he was pointing, and that's when I saw it. I could barely make out a man standing maybe only 40 feet from where I had just been. He was staring directly into the ground, so I couldn't see his face. Though he had short black hair and was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, which definitely was not enough when considering how cold it was outside. The guy's shirt was covered in what honestly looked like blood, but what best caught my attention was the black garbage bag he was holding behind him, like as if he had been dragging it. I sternly told Anthony to drive, and he would listen. As we drove past the man, he did absolutely nothing, rather just kept staring into the ground. Once we had arrived to my house, Anthony would explain what happened. While I was out looking at the footprints, he had begun to notice a figure moving towards me. He would then lay on the horn, which caused the figure to freeze and me to look back at Anthony. Shortly after, followed by me walking back to the car. We would later call the police and report a man in the woods dragging what looked like a body in a black garbage bag. But they would never find anybody. In fact, they wouldn't even find the footprints, likely due to them disappearing because of how hard it was snowing at the time. For obvious reasons, Anthony would end up staying with me and my family that night. Ever since the encounter, both Anthony and I do our best to avoid that road, especially at night.